Crimea is a peninsula located on the northern coast of the Black Sea, known for its rich history and diverse culture.
4 key military airfields were attacked last night, specifically those from where the strategic bomber aircraft known as the Kirov Guards regularly take off. Strike on aircraft. Nearly 200 drones attacked Crimea last night. The drones' targets were the Saki, Gvardeyskaya, and Kirovskaya airfields. NASA satellites have detected a large-scale fire near the Gvardeyskaya airfield in Crimea. At the Crystal oil depot in Engels, another fuel tank caught fire. The whole city is covered in smoke. As they say, the show must go on or the action continues. The situation at the Crystal oil depot in Engels has been ongoing for several days now. Meanwhile, Russia has lost another Su-25. Special Operation Forces destroyed a decision-making center in the Keshton direction, and the headquarters in Makivka was also attacked and blown up. We will discuss all this with the well-known military analyst Roman Svetan. Roman Grigorievich, welcome.
Thank you. I wish everyone good health.
Roman Grigorievich, let's start with the hell in occupied Crimea, because more than 200 drones attacked 3 key military airfields, Ardaiska, Saki, Kirovske, and also something similar happened in Novofedorivka. The floor is yours.
Novofedorivka is a depot near Saki. So basically, Novofedorivka and the Saki airfield are part of the same complex. The strike on Crimea today was truly large scale. This is exactly what we have repeatedly requested, let's put it mildly, on air. We kept circling around Crimea, but never touched Crimea itself. It was like that, a sacred cow, so to speak. But today it was really a well-executed attack. Indeed, 200 drones can overwhelm any air defense system, and thanks to the large number of decoys, the Russian forces, at least the air defense units, expended a lot of missiles today. And still quite significant damage was inflicted on the Russian airfields, both in Saki and near Simferopol. Naturally, in the area near Sevastopol as well, there have been similar developments, and the drones have even managed to reach as far as Kerch. There are actually 2 airfields located there, both of which are currently being carefully prepared for such launches, specifically for the new batches of drones arriving from Iran, namely the 2nd and 3rd ones. And these 2 airfields were also attacked, at least as of now. The operation was well thought out and excellently executed. Most likely it was our people who carried it out. So this isn't a special operation. Most likely it's army work. You could even say it's already the work of Madyar, the new commander of the unmanned systems forces, who has just taken office. Although in reality, our sailors should be the ones working in Crimea. That is the Navy, the naval forces. Within the naval forces, there should be their own Madyar, their own sailor Madyar, who will create unmanned systems forces specifically related to the maritime domain, underwater, surface, and aerial, for the liberation of Crimea. If today's attack is not a one-off, but a systematic effort, then believe me, by the end of the year, at least half of the Russians in Crimea will have disappeared from there. They'll simply disappear, because if this happens every day, even if it's just 100, even 100 drones targeting airfields first, definitely. Why airfields? The Russians use airfield grounds in several ways. The first is for stationing tactical or army aviation. That means airplanes and helicopters. Second, they use the airfield grounds to station anti-aircraft missile systems and radar units of the Russian Federation's radio technical troops. And third, they use almost all airfield grounds as transit depots for transferring ammunition. That's why, for us, it's especially important, first and foremost, to destroy the airfields and everything located on them. Airfield technical equipment, vehicles, ammunition, and of course the aircraft themselves.
Roman Ilyich, I wanted to talk to you about aviation. In the meantime, dear audience, please like this video and write in the comments what you think about the successful operations of the ISU and about the idea that Crimea should be burning, military targets of course, and that Russians should be swimming backstroke and freestyle to Russian territory. Roman Ilyich, can we assume that at these airfields that were attacked last night, enemy aircraft were also targeted, or did we only strike the fuel facilities there? What do you think?
Well, not all of those airfields currently have Russian aircraft stationed there. They have mostly pulled back to central and eastern airfields in Crimea. That's why some of the airfields are used by the Russians either for army aviation, for helicopters, for forward operating bases, so-called operational airfields, or for deploying missile systems and radio technical troops systems. So this is very important for us. In order to deliver serious strikes against Russian aviation, including this, we first need to achieve air superiority. And that begins with destroying ground-based surveillance and response systems, meaning the same anti-aircraft missile systems. That's exactly what started today. The thing is, several times such operations have already started and then they were cut off as if by magic. How many times have we talked about this? You know, here's the beginning, here's the start, and then suddenly it just shuts down again for a month and a half, 2 months, and no one is giving Crimea a sideways glance, at least for now. Right now, well, I'm just afraid of making a mistake again. If this is the beginning of Crimea's liberation, then attacks like this should happen every night. Every night, 100 drones should be flying into Crimea.
Roman Egorovich, regarding the special operation by the SBU in Novorossiysk and including the missile carriers, what do we see? During massive missile attacks, missile carriers go out into the Black Sea. As far as I understand, they hide them in Novorossiysk and bring them out to sea on the necessary days. The question is, how can we attack all the missile carriers today so that the Black Sea fleet ceases to exist?
They have up to 100 ships and submarines left. Both submarines, there are 4 of them, and surface ships serve as missile carriers, at least carriers of caliber missiles. The submarines mainly have 4 caliber missiles in their torpedo tubes. As for the ships, they can have 4, 6, or even 8. Well, it depends on which launcher is installed. A few months ago, our banking company, together with the bank, made a commitment to the Saudis not to strike Russian oil refineries or the Russian oil industry, and that included the Black Sea fleet as well. That's why they now feel right at home, so to speak, at least in the eastern part of the Black Sea. So here the question is, first of all, for the politicians. But actually, it's not even a question for the politicians anymore. Now it's a question for the security services. Why haven't they yet arrested for treason those politicians who ensured the safety of Russian hydrocarbons and the Russian Black Sea fleet? The Russians are leaving the base, say, in Novorossiysk and only go out to sea in order to avoid being hit. So when they enter the base, it's a compact area with a high concentration of Russian ships. They're avoiding being hit. And then, of course, they mostly return for maintenance purposes.
As for whether Ukrainian intelligence services could pull off something similar but only on Russian territory, what are our capabilities? Do they match up? Let's discuss this.
Well, from a military standpoint, the preparation and execution of the operation were carried out at the highest level. Intelligence agencies were involved, Mossad, several other Israeli intelligence services, plus the Air Force. Again, pay attention. The main thing was the Air Force, meaning long-range strike capabilities. 200 fighter jets or various types of aircraft took off and struck previously identified targets, and the air defense systems had been practically neutralized beforehand by Mossad special operations. So it was a combined attack, well thought out, well prepared, and well executed. But that's from a military perspective. It's roughly like if we were now discussing whether the blade was well sharpened. The axe of the executioner who beheaded some queen, well, it was well sharpened, no doubt about that. The question is, why was there a need to behead at all? That's a different question, a different aspect. The fact is, strikes by Israel on Iran at this point will ignite a war in the Middle East, and that will affect us as well. It will affect us at the very least, first of all, by driving up oil prices. Right now, the price of oil has already increased by more than 10. Oil prices could rise by up to 30%. Oil could rebound to $100, up to $100 per barrel. This means Russia will get twice as many dollars from oil as before. There had been a trend of falling oil prices, a trend of a declining Russian economy, but now everything will reverse 180 degrees. Oil prices will rise, and so will the revenues of the Russian hydrocarbon sector. There will be an increase in the production of military equipment, purchases of ammunition, and the mobilization of new recruits. In other words, the war in the Middle East will hit us very hard through the surge in Russia. And at the very moment when it was necessary to destroy the Russian hydrocarbon sector, our banking Kaganak covered for them Russian oil and gas facilities from strikes by our special services and from attacks by our army. How can we counteract this? Activate the mechanism of sanctions against the Malukavdagovs again. The most effective sanctions against the Russian oil and gas sector are its complete destruction, especially since it is practically begging to be destroyed. But in the end, even Russian partisans are doing this. But we can see how they set forests on fire where Russian oil pipelines run, how they set fires, even in what we call the Far Eastern Ukrainian People's Republic, in Komsomolsk-on-Amur, which is actually Duner, our so-called green wedge, an oil refinery was burning there. Refinery. Roman Lvovich, why is it that what can be done with Iran can't be done with Russia today? Well, first of all, we have nothing to do it with. Believe me, if we had the means, some of our agencies, we don't have missiles, we don't have ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, even though we should have them in a rocket building country like Ukraine, but we don't have missiles. It's both laughable and tragic, as they say. This is a question for the authorities, for all the authorities over more than 30 years of our independence. We were left without missiles during the Russian offensive operations. So yes, it can definitely be done, but we are the ones who have to do it. No one is going to do anything for us, and there's no point in asking anyone. We have to do it ourselves and strike at the Russian leadership, including those in the Kremlin. The Rublyovka bathhouses and the Kremlin, how long have we been talking about this? We've been talking about it for 3 years. What else is there to talk about? What should we have? Strikes on certain Iranian military targets, first of all, nuclear facilities. It's not that easy to reach a nuclear facility. For example, the facility that was attacked by the Israelis is buried more than 50 meters underground. You can't just get to it that easily. That's one. And second, above this facility, above the reactor and the centrifuges, there's an 8-meter thick layer of concrete. So they were fully prepared there. That's why, in reality, Iraq's nuclear facilities weren't actually damaged. In fact, the station runs on Russian fuel, and in that sense, it hasn't been touched. There are about 5 or 6 Iranian facilities there, and basically they only tried to hit one of them, but even then they only managed to hit it from above, while inside it kept operating as usual. The centrifuges are still spinning, and as for how Iran will respond, well, who knows? Especially now, since the so-called Pandora's box has been opened. So since the strike was on a nuclear facility, it means Iran can now strike back with nuclear means, even just with nuclear waste, after all. They could take the waste from Bushehr now and shower Israel with strontium and cesium. After that, you wouldn't be able to live there for 24,000 years, at least according to the cesium levels. And if they hit with uranium, either 235 or 238, one has a half-life of 700 million years and the other 4.5 billion years. So can you imagine what would happen to Israel in that case? So again, who will end up suffering? The Zionists will slip away, they'll run off to the United States. It will be the ordinary Israeli citizens who are left behind, the ones who will bear the brunt of this radiation. So these are things that must never be allowed to happen. Strikes on nuclear facilities, they are absolutely unacceptable by definition. There are certain international control mechanisms like the IAEA, and it has been granted access in some areas. A continuation of the 2015 agreement was already practically ready, again under IAEA supervision together with the Europeans. But the Israelis carried out a preemptive strike before the agreement with Europe, and the IAEA could be finalized, essentially not giving Iran the opportunity to conclude this agreement. If the agreement had been in place, it would have worked from 2015 to 2018. And during that time, the IAEA fully monitored all stages of uranium enrichment. So now the Israelis have created, well, for themselves, or rather to be more precise, the Israelis have created a problem for ordinary Israelis. And what the response will be, well, it's hard to say right off the bat, but Iranians aren't simple people either, believe me. There are at least an order of magnitude more of them in terms of numbers, and no one is going to forgive things like that. So ahead lies a serious bloody war, which for us, it's negative. It hasn't brought us any positives at all, and it won't. Why? Because the Shaheeds, everyone talks about the Iranian ones and so on, they're actually based on the Chinese Sunflower 200. The Russian Iran is not an Iranian Shahed. The Russian Geran is a Chinese Sunflower 200. No matter how many military facilities are destroyed in Iran, the Russians will keep assembling the Chinese Sunflower 200 from Chinese parts, calling it Geran, just like before. If we're talking about striking the main production plants, then it should be the Chinese ones. What are the Israelis going to fly to China to destroy Chinese factories? That's something our special services should be doing. These are questions for our special services.
Dear audience, please like this video and share your thoughts in the comments. We're returning to our main topic, the Russian aggression, the war of Russia against Ukraine. Roman Igorovich regarding the oil depot. For example, at the Crystal oil depot in Engels, another fuel tank caught fire and the whole city is covered in smoke. Essentially, drones attacked the oil depot on the night of June 5th to 6th, but the fire still hasn't been extinguished. Let's evaluate this operation.
Well, first of all, it's not just an oil depot, or rather, it's not a simple oil depot. When it comes to oil depots, the Russians have thousands of them. But in reality, this is a fuel and lubricant storage facility for the strategic aviation airfield Engels 2. And it's precisely in this capacity that it is very important to us. This is a consumable storage facility. The main base and the main storage for aviation kerosene is underground in karst caves, in caisson reservoirs. In other words, just try to get there. There are tens of thousands of tons of kerosene there. So from this underground reservoir, the fuel is pumped into the expendable base, into the crystal, and then the base or storage, it's called a fuel and lubricant storage facility. That's what it's called. From there, it is used to refuel the same aircraft. And the point was chosen correctly, where at least the main flow could be cut off. Of course, they also have a backup option when they can refuel directly from the tanks, but I think we'll get to those as well. So the strike on this fuel and lubricants depot was excellently executed, precisely calculated. We once discussed with you how the attack was carried out. They broke through the Russian air defense frontally using a large number of decoy drones, and the strike drones got through, took out the target, and set 3 tanks on fire at once right away. And now, until it burns out completely, this won't stop. Kerosene is an interesting product. You can actually use it to put out a fire. For example, you take a bucket of kerosene, pour it on a fire, and it will go out. But it's the kerosene vapors that burn. And if you heat kerosene to a certain temperature and then ignite the vapors, just like what happened during the drone strike, then there's practically nothing you can use to put it out. And in fact, they don't even try to extinguish it. They just step aside, they dig trenches around it and watch until everything burns out. And until everything there has burned out, it will keep burning. It could keep burning for another month.
Roman Grigorievich, today's news. Russia has lost another Su-25.
Well, most likely it's related to technological issues. The Su-25 is already about 40 years old. They've been flying since the Afghan war, since the 1980s. They're not bad machines. In fact, they were excellent for their time when they were built. A good attack aircraft, but they're already quite old grandpas, I would say. And technologically, of course, they're falling apart. And there aren't that many left. When out of 3 or 2, you can make one. So this fleet of machines the Russians have is dwindling to nothing. And even as they keep crashing, like today when there was a loss reported by Russian media, Roman Grigorievich.
Over the past 2 days, we've also been attacking the Moscow region. There were military targets there. Roman Grigorievich, what was attacked in the last few days near Moscow? Because the drones didn't reach Moscow, but explosions were heard near Moscow. They say those were military targets. In
Moscow and the Moscow region are concentrated. About 30% of Russia's high-tech military production is actually located in that particular region. So a third is in Moscow and the Moscow region. That's why it's very important for us to break through, to keep pushing through the Russian air defenses. It's very difficult to do this because there are at least 2 defensive lines. The first is the frontal air defense, which is very hard to break through. Bryansk and Belgorod regions, they're practically packed with air defenses aimed right toward Moscow. And then there's the second site-specific one in the Moscow area. So sometimes when we see reports that the Russians have shot down 50 to 70 of our drones in the Bryansk and Belgorod regions, those were headed for Moscow. Mostly they're shooting down decoys that cost a few $100s, while the missile to shoot them down costs tens of thousands of dollars. But nevertheless, some still get through. And so there was a strike in the Moscow region on one of the factories that produces circuit boards for electronics. As I said, this is high-tech manufacturing. And as of now, at least the technological process has been halted. Honestly, to actually reach Moscow, you need ballistic missiles. In other words, without ballistic missiles, we won't be able to break through Moscow's site-specific air defenses. Drones won't be able to take it out.
Roman Igorovich, in the Moscow region, a microelectronics factory in Zubovo was attacked. There's a hole in the roof. The factory in Zubovo is a production complex that's part of the Rezonit Technopark in the Moscow region. It specializes in manufacturing printed circuit boards and electronic components for various industries, including defense and industrial sectors. That's what this is about.
That's exactly what I was talking about. Yes. So they hit Resonate directly. The technological cycle has been halted, and that's the most important thing. But it can only be destroyed by ballistic missiles. Well, even a drone with 50 kilograms of explosives can't completely disable any military facility.
Roman Lvovich, from a military standpoint, how many years would it take for Ukraine to have ballistic missiles? Not just a few, of course, but in mass production. How many thousands of missiles per year would that be if we take examples from other countries that produce ballistic missiles?
Well, the thing is, Ukraine is a missile producing country. Back in the Soviet Union, we produced a full cycle of several types of missiles, starting from air-to-air and air-to-ship missiles like the KH-35 and KH-35U, from which the Neptune was developed. This is an aircraft-launched anti-ship missile, meaning a ship missile launched from the air. So we produced it entirely, the full cycle. There were several other missiles of this kind, and ballistic missiles as well. We produced ballistic missiles. These are cruise missiles, you could say. The KH-35U, especially at that level already. But as for ballistics, we produced intercontinental ballistic missiles. The Satan SS-18 was produced at our Yuzhmash plant. It has a range of 11,000 kilometers. That means it could reach as far as Beijing and Pyongyang. In other words, we preserved the entire technological chain, technical documentation, the production system, very important mechanisms for certain tests, test stands, and of course the engineering staff. 10 years ago, we produced and launched GROM, a whole complex that we created with an investment of $100 million with an audit, and we sold it to them as well. So this was just a few years ago. In other words, we have the entire production base for manufacturing ballistic missiles. It's not like we're starting from scratch. In order to launch, say, mass production of those same GROMs with a range of 500 kilometers, we would need about 150 to $200 million and 1.5 to 2 years. So if this government had started it 6 years ago, by now we could have done it 3 times over. We could have launched serial production of the second generation GROMs. If at this point we don't have this GROM, and we don't, because otherwise it would have long since hit Moscow, it means that for 6 years, this government has just been dragging its feet, the green one. That's a big problem. The executive branch should have been sent to the armed forces of Ukraine a long time ago. I've said this so many times already. To demagolize the executive branch, you don't need elections or re-elections for that. This is in accordance with our constitution, according to the legal framework of our laws. And to replace the executive branch, Shmyhal's team just can't handle it. They absolutely can't handle it. The Umarovs, the Shmyhals, and all the rest of this Shmyhal crowd, they're not in the right place. They need to be replaced with professionals who know how to quickly launch a program, even a ballistic one, and how to restructure the country's economy to a military footing, but that's an entire process. The work should be done by military personnel with basic military education and who understand economics. We have enough of those.
Roman Ilyich, to sum up, special operations forces destroyed the decision-making center of the Russians in the Kherson direction, and the Russian headquarters in Makivka was also attacked. The video report of the HIMARS MLRS strike was for the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. Everyone wrote that there were many killed, many wounded. The floor is yours.
Well, about Makivka, I'm from Makivka, and I've said so many times that we don't strike at the rear. So most likely our rocket troops thought so that Svetan wouldn't curse all over the place, they just went and hit Makivka. The main thing is it was not far from my house. In other words, they completed the combat mission, of course. Well done. The range allows it. We have the means to strike. HIMARS works well at this range. And of course, in Kherson on the southern front as well. There's some serious Russian activity going on there right now. They're still at a crossroads deciding where to send the remaining reserves, either to reinforce the Zaporizhzhia direction where there is some action, or to the right bank of the Dnipro near Kherson. So they haven't decided yet. Because the reserves that could have helped them in both directions, Putin burned through before May 9th by setting unattainable objectives. In other words, impossible tasks. So now, at this moment, we can say, let's thank Putin for his complete idiocy in strategic planning. because it's precisely his idiocy, this political trap, that's giving us a breather right now. We still have about 2 months before the next wave of reserves arrives. In these 2 months, it's possible to give the Russians a hard time. Well, we'll see what we'll give them a hard time for. We'll see, and we'll talk about it in each of our reviews.
Roman Nikolaevich, finally, the Russian armed forces have entered Yablunovka in the Sumy region, according to Deep State. That's 26 kilometers from the regional center. The gray zone has also expanded in Yunakovka, a village at the epicenter of the fighting. Please comment on this, it's very important.
Yablunovka and Yunakovka. Yesterday, they said they were 20 kilometers from Sumy, and now it's already 26 kilometers. So does that mean they're having a negative advance or something? They've fallen back 6 kilometers in the opposite direction. That's about where they are, somewhere between 20 and 30 kilometers. They're stuck there and will keep being stuck in that area. It's a small bridgehead, even from the perspective of the Sumy region, not to mention all of Ukraine. A small bridgehead that the Russians jumped into on the heels of our retreating troops. That was already a mistake made by our politicians. We thanked Putin for his political decision. Here, it was a mistake by our politicians who kept our troops in offensive positions in the Kursk direction almost to the point of disaster, nearly to catastrophe. Then we had to run because, you see, the politicians needed to have negotiations with the Saudis from a stronger position at least. Nothing came of it for them, but we had to flee from the Kursk region. And on the heels of our retreating troops, the Russians rushed into the Sumy region. But I'll say it again, this is about the same level as what happened in the Kharkiv region. Right now, they're in the area of Lipetsk and in the Volchansk area. So they rushed in and that's it. They got stuck. In the same way, the Russians will be stuck circling around Yablunivka, Yanakivka, and so on. But that's it. They won't advance any further. That is, on one hand, there are serious fortifications there, first of all, and secondly, reserves have now been redirected there, and our troops have already recovered from this strategic failure of our politicians. They've already recovered, and now in some areas we're even regaining previously lost positions, pushing the Russians back, and we're advancing in the Kursk direction towards Tetkino, which is nearby to the west. The Russians entered our territory and we entered theirs. Alaverdi.
Friends, please like this video. Roman Grigorievich and I meet 3 times a week on my YouTube channel, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. We discuss the military and political situation. Write a few kind words in support of Ukraine in the comments. What do you think about Israel's special operation, as well as on all